I'm a big believer where I say like everybody is a media company, everybody's in the media business. And all that basically means is that we have like all these tools that we can create content instantly. And we sometimes build it up to be more than what it is. A lot of times just having a conversation with somebody, whether you're probably having conversations on a regular basis, the difference is I hit record, you may not hit record.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the How to Scale a Business podcast. My name is Hector Santiesteban, and I am your host for today. Our special guest is Mr. Gresham Harkless. He is the founder of Blue 16 Media, a podcast host. And if I were to read all of his accolades, we'd be here and take up the whole podcast, but has been featured on a number of lists, received a bunch of awards and recognition for what he's been doing. Gresh, thanks for hanging out with us today.
Hector, excited to be here, and you're far too kind. I'm very much so a busybody. That's the best way I'll define it.
Yeah, and I'm curious, I'll be honest, you're probably one of the youngest guests that we've had on the show, and also, maybe one of the most elated, if that is a word. But give us some of the key stops along the way on your journey, and then we'll sort of talk about a little bit about what you're up to now.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you saying that. And, I might sometimes feel young. Sometimes I feel, my knees right now are telling me that I'm a lot older than that. Sometimes I feel, but, that's just the process of life. But for me, like I always say, I felt like my coming of age story was, when I was 10 years old. Like I was a kid that did a lot of entrepreneurial things when I was younger, potato chips on the playground, selling beads. I would get beads and create necklaces and things like that. So I did all those things as a young kid. But I think when I was 10, my dad was in the military. So he got redirected and moved to an entirely different country for an entire year. So it was me and my mom, and we didn't have all these tools that we have before us now to instantly connect with somebody all the way across the world. So at that time, I started a family newspaper. I was covering like all the things that were going on in my family, everything from squirrels getting into my grandma's house to a wedding that didn't happen to my cousin being born and all these different things. I would just compile a lot of things. I always like to read the newspaper. I said, hey, it'd be cool if I started one. Nothing robust, just some clip art, Microsoft Word, and a snazzy monthly title that I would have. And then I would just basically send these to my dad, but I also sold some of the subscriptions. So I always usually bring that up is because I'm a big believer in like, if you don't know who you are, don't know what lights you up, what gets you going, look back at when you were a kid, you probably just did stuff just to do it. And so while I was navigating, going through, undergrad, I went to Howard University for my undergrad at Georgetown, got my master's, trying to figure out, hey, who am I? What do I want to do? What am I going to do for the rest of my life? I went back to that story, and I always kind of filter whatever part of the journey my life is in through like, what would 10-year-old Gresh do? And that led me on the path of doing a lot of different things. I have a digital marketing business. I create a lot of content myself for entrepreneurs, CEOs, and business owners. I have a franchise brokerage business that I recently launched as well too. But I'll just say I'm super, if not crazy, passionate around entrepreneurship and business, and just helping like CEOs, entrepreneurs, and business owners like get to that next level.
Yeah, I always am jealous of the people who got to, sell stuff on the playground. I went to a Catholic school and we would get expelled if we tried to hustle like that. Because I was always like, damn, how come I didn't do that? And I was like, oh, yeah, they were coming down hard on those kids. And so it took me a couple of decades to sort of get my first taste at entrepreneurship. I'm curious for you, when you look at sort of all of the things that have sort of connected the businesses that you do, or if there's a sort of a common thread, whether it's in the way that you provide the service or even in the way that you've sort of built the business, what might that common thread look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I'm always asking myself, that question, I think you always want to try to be like very anchored and, moving from purpose or moving from alignment and strengths and things like that. I really think the content part is really, a big aspect of everything, that I try to do. Now there's phrase called content creators. Everybody's a content creator, but I really love to write. I mean, it wasn't like I was creating content. I just absolutely love to write. I love to create. I love all those things. So when I, think about like how all those things come together, like I'm a big believer where I say like everybody is a media company, everybody's in the media business. And all that basically means is that we have like all these tools that we can create content instantly. And we sometimes build it up to be more than what it is. A lot of times just having a conversation with somebody, whether you're probably having conversations on a regular basis. The difference is I hit record, you may not hit record. And I think if we start to look at it from that standpoint, I think, a lot of things start to open up. So I think my common thread and the way that I try to approach things is saying, hey, there's a gap there, there's an opportunity, maybe there's not enough content being written, maybe there's not enough information out there. So let me lean more into that and see how I could use my superpower there. So I would say that's probably the common thing that I always do is like anything new I'm thinking about is just like, hey, what's the content look like there? How can I, use my superpowers there?
Yeah, it's interesting because that seems to be such a important part of businesses sort of strategy today. What's your media strategy, and right, or what's your marketing strategy? And right after that, it's like, okay, what's the media component of it? And it reminds me that decades ago, it wasn't accessible. It wasn't possible. You had to pay to play to get access and sort of distribution. But now, if a company is willing to not only put in the work, because I think that there's more than just effort that goes into it, but if they're willing to take the right sort of steps, that they can kind of create that platform for themselves, and that can be a great way to it could really be a great point of leverage for whatever they want to do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes, and I think he said it so well. Like, again, when I went into college, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Came in an undecided major. I ended up becoming an English major. I wanted to do journalism. And I started to read a lot around the journalism industry and what was happening. And you start to see now that a lot of people that were in journalism have transitioned into like writing business blogs or, just doing these things from a business standpoint. That storytelling piece is such a huge thing. But I think we forget that we literally have in our pockets one of the most powerful tools we've ever had. And we can right now create content that can be media, can be a podcast, can be a vlog, whatever it is. And I think if we sometimes like don't, put it on that pedestal, but we just start creating or start literally recording what we're doing, then I think some really phenomenal things can happen from there.
Yeah, I think people forget about the power of stories. We work with a lot of companies that they're one of their first thoughts when we start talking to them is like, why would someone listen to a podcast about ours? Or what would we even talk about? And the thing is that obviously there's, a ton of ways to train and educate and inform people. And also just a great story for a great story's sake is valuable enough, is something worth, looking into. I think back to, the squirrel in your grandma's, house, or a cousin being born. Like these are stories, but they matter to people. And if so, I think that that's sort of what businesses, I think they have to open their eyes to, that everybody has a story, some story that's compelling. It's just a matter of whether or not they're willing to put it out, share it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like you probably say you need to be sharing that story. And I think that's why you do all the awesome things that you're doing. And no, I'm super excited to kind of be here today.
Yeah, I think it's a big change for people. I'm curious for you, when you look back at, how business has evolved over the time that you've been in it, and maybe how it stayed the same. What are some of the things that have remained consistent over your time? And then, what are some things that you find yourself having to make adjustments to?
Yeah, I think that it's funny because it's been, since I started my digital marketing business, probably been, close to like 12 years or so since I started that. And I remember in the beginning stages, like listening to people that say, hey, marketing are the same principles, just the ways that you're doing it are different. And I feel like that is the same thing I could say now. Now I'm a little bit more tenured, a little bit more seasoned, I guess you could say, in the game. So I think that's, something that I've seen. Like at the end of the day, like again, when I talk a lot with people, I say, hey, think about marketing, think about building your media company very much so like you're going to the grocery store to figure out what ingredients do I need to create the dish that I want. You have a goal, you have a target market, you have all those things you want to get clear on. Just what has changed is probably going to be the ingredients that you choose. You have things like AI that allow you to be able to kind of mass produce even more content than you could in the past. But in the same breath, if you're not asking and answering those questions, which are who's my target market? What are the goals that I have for the business? Am I trying to sell more books? Am I trying to get more people to buy my widget? Am I trying to go on a speaking tour? Like those will vary, like how you're using that ingredient. And then, of course, you just want to be honest around like what your resources are. So 10 years, 15, 20 years ago, you had a budget. 20 years now and 20 years in the future, you're going to have a budget. So I think when you get honest and clear about those constraints, those things don't change, but the way you leverage them might. So, of course, you have algorithms and all those things are changing. They're constantly going to be changing. The platforms potentially are going to change in the future. But I think if you get to those core parts of like, who you are and what you're trying to do, it ends up being very valuable. And I will say one other aspect that I think we miss out on, and you touched on it, which I think is a huge thing, is I say we often forget about the human part of business. So those stories, you hear things about being authentic, You hear things about even sharing the things that don't go well, your failures, all those things. It all connects to that human part. And I think even though we have all this technology and things at our fingertips, as we saw during the pandemic, we crave and want that human part. We're doing it differently, but we still want and need it on a very humanistic level. So I think those are the things that are going to be consistent. And I think while tools might amplify it, you don't want to lose sight of like why you're doing what you're doing and how that connects with that human level.
Yeah, I think so much of what I've sort of been on this kick about is how content can really create trust, and how separates somebody, especially in this AI filled world, in this world where there's so much content or even just call it distractions coming at us, that the things that are going to stick are, to your point, the things that are authentic, the things that align, the things that resonate. And it's I don't know if to say it's harder. It seems like it's just easier to do that sort of at scale, or in a way that can affect lots of people through something like a video or content, or pick your choice, right? Whether it's TikTok or Instagram or YouTube. But the ability to have your face there, interacting and building that relationship with people when you're not there, it just seems like an over indexed, like something that people should absolutely be taking advantage of, that most, not to say most, that a lot or too many aren't.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that a lot of times people get hesitant to say, hey, no one wants to hear my story. Like you said, your client, or who wants to hear my story and things like that. But it's so funny that you will say your story sometimes 100 times, you'll post it a million times on social, and someone will be like, I never knew that about you. And it's like, wait a minute, I've been posting it for the last like 10 years. And it's like, I never saw that. But I think that speaks to one, algorithms, those play a big part. But I think too, like, we don't realize, like, for on a marketing level, for things to kind of stick and people to kind of remember things and understand things, they have to hear it again and again and again. That's one of those tried and true marketing pillar lessons. You have to, it used to be 7 and 9 times or whatever that you had to say something. Now you have to do it more than that. So it's the same idea, but you just have to do it differently. So I think we shouldn't get caught up in saying everybody knows it, or I've already said it. We just have to say it again and again and again. And then it might be the seventh time, it might be the 100th time that somebody says, oh, that's what you're saying. I know somebody I can connect you with, or I can use your product or services, or whatever that is. So don't lose sight of that when you're, continuing to try to share who you are, what you do, and of course, how you do it.
Yeah, I think Google put out a study somewhere recently that it said something to the effect of like over 2 hours worth of content. And I could be overstating it, but it was a long amount of content, something like a few dozen times. And again, I'm probably saying that lower, across over a dozen platforms, right? So they is like saying they need to see you on Facebook, and then they need to see you over on LinkedIn, and they need to see you on these different places because people are busy. The trust develops slowly, and there's so much noise out there that I think that so many people expect that if we put out something one time, we make one post, everybody's going to see it. And you being in this game long enough, you know that like almost nobody sees a singular post.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny. You listen to and hear those people that go viral, and you're like, how did you do that one post and how did it go viral? And it's like, well, I've been doing this for about 15 years, or I tested out 70 different ways and it didn't work, and the final one worked. And it's so funny when you start to like realize the secret to the overnight success is it takes 10 or 15 years. It's not that one time, it's doing it over and over again, getting better at your craft. You look at people like Mr. Beast, you really start to drill down into those stories, which is why I love podcasting, because you start to drill down a little bit more into how a person got to where they were. And it often is not, I woke up, I tried something, I hit it off, and then I don't have to do anything else. It's very rarely that. So I think it starts to give a reality on what that journey, what, entrepreneurship and business ultimately looks like.
Yeah, I had a failed digital marketing agency. Well, I don't know if it was a failed. It was just I continued to pivot, pivot and pivot and pivot. We did websites, we did social media, we did all these things. And one of the reasons that I landed on podcasts is something that I could be, that I could feel aligned with, is because of what you said and the depth that people can go and can experience, in a conversation, right? This one's only a half an hour, but people are spending hours listening to these, and the amount of trust and the relationship that's built between the listener and that individual who is oftentimes a business owner, or whoever it is, right? Whoever's on the other side of the mic, even if it's one-sided, is so powerful, right? That's why you see these streamers that have people shutting down, streets and blocks to come see them. It's like it is that relationship that, although it is just one-sided, I think they call it a parasocial relationship. It is a sort of relationship that can for sure get people to buy something, if not much more.
Yeah, it's so funny, and like in this day and age, that's why I love podcasting, as a platform, because you get we have more accessibility to people, to successful people, even non-successful people than we ever had at any other time, and I think that provides that opportunity to connect. But I think we as entrepreneurs, business owners, CEOs, whatever title we might give ourselves. That's why I think it's so imperative to kind of tell that story, to talk about those things, because you know we sometimes undersell and understate the genius or the experience that we have. And I remember, like, especially in the beginning, I still remind myself of that, is you don't have to be the expert, and to some degree we can even argue if people are experts. Like, I think the people that are the best of the best are constantly striving to get better. But in order to share some of those things that you've done, you don't have to be 100,000,000 miles, down the way. You just have to be one step ahead. And when you start to realize that, it's like, hey, I started a business. Yeah, it's day two, but I'm still further along than the person that never started. And I think once we start to kind of like maybe just use the medium for what it is, I think some really phenomenal things can start to happen.
Gresham, when we get back from break, I'm curious. We've talked. You could have listened to this first half of the episode in 2025 when we're recording it, right? December of 2025, 2035, 2045, and I think that all of the advice that you've given would be timeless. And also, what's interesting about media and technology is that there's these timeless sort of strategies, and then there's also the time full tactics. The things that are coming out, the new stuff, things that where there's, I think Gary Vee called it the gray space, right, where people aren't paying attention. When we get back from break, I'm curious about what you are experimenting with, what you're excited about in that regard, and maybe in what you're playing with there. So we're going to get into that right after this break. Hey, y'all, today's episode is brought to you by Amplify Media, and we are a podcast and content production company. Well, we like to think of ourselves as the fractional media part of your company, because chances are, if you listen to this, you probably have a passion, a product, a mission, a message, something you're trying to get out to the world, but you might not have the time, the team, or the tech skills to be able to do it. If that's the case, we can help. Go to amplifymedia.com. That's AMPLAFY media.com. You can also check the show notes for the link. And with that, let's get back to Gresh. Gresh, I'll just throw it out there. What is the thing that you find yourself playing with, experimenting? What are you most bullish on when it comes to new tech, new tools, new something that most people might consider new, even if it's not like that new to you? What are you most excited about these days?
I hate to go to the default that probably so many people say, but it's definitely around like AI, your chat GPTs, and this technology. It's just really phenomenal, like what you can do. And I think it's probably the most phenomenal thing is like, I'll tell you this, like one of the first jobs I had, out of school was at Yellow Book. And Yellow Book had changed their name to Haibu. And I remember talking, I was a young, scrappy, salesperson, and I didn't stay there long, but I was talking to some of the agents and they said, what's so funny is that when you go to people, it used to be that you would tell them, hey, I want to sell you an advertising Yellow Book. And they're like, absolutely sure. I put my kids through college off of this Yellow Book. And you talk to people of that generation, when you ask, hey, do you know a plumber? They're going to go to the Yellow Book. Few years later, you talk to people and you're like, hey, can you tell me about a plumber? They're going to go to the internet. You talk to younger people, they're going to say, hey, I'm going to go on my phone and check. We're at this place now where people are using AI. And so I say all that to say, like, part of my exercise for myself is really to take the blinders off that I might even have. Not that I use the Yellow Book, but I did use the internet. I use my phone on like what's even possible. So I think playing around, of course, with it to say, hey, I want to create a blog post, that's all well and good, but there's just so much opportunity that I think we haven't even scraped the surface. So that's something that you're constantly playing around with. But ChatGPT, your Bard, all these are fueling a lot of these AI tools that are coming out that are doing things as far as like repurposing content or transcribing podcast episodes or repurposing podcast episodes. Or I was just playing around with the tool where I wanted to talk around AI vending that is like a business opportunity. And I was like, hey, can you take my face and turn it into like a Terminator picture? And I uploaded the face. So you're just playing around with all those things of like, hey, I have this idea, I have this vision. Before it was like, oh, I'm not going to be able to do that, or it's going to take too much time, or is it even worth it? Now we have these things that are literally at our fingertips that we can kind of test out those ideas. So very long-winded answer, but just fully playing out and just saying, hey, what limits can I reduce? And can I just like get in that sandbox and just see what's possible?
Yeah, I recently created a website. Sort of the content was written by, was aided by AI, but it was one of the first times where the actual website was built, and whether it was the images or the structure, all of this stuff, and it used that would have taken months to be able to do. I would have had to hire somebody to do it, and maybe it would have never actually happened. But like over a weekend, we were able to spit out an offer and spit out a new product line, and it really is kind of removing the ceiling from what is possible. Also, like I even like from a personal standpoint, I had been putting off scheduling my kids' dentist appointments for like it was like weeks. It was way too long. Where I was like, okay, this is the kids that should not, should not be suffering because you don't want to go to Google, figure out, because it was such a process where searching them up, then figuring out if they're in the right, insurance thing, then figuring out which ones are closed. And there was all of these sort of things that needed to happen in order for me to just make the phone call. I use Gemini. I'm sort of in the Google space, but I asked Gemini, spit this out, find them. Here are the ones that we need, put it in a sheet. And I had a spreadsheet with how far they were away from our house, which ones were for sure, in our insurance, and it was all done. And it was so easy. And in like 15 minutes, we had the appointment. And I'm sitting there thinking like, damn, like I could have gotten this done so much quicker if I didn't have this false belief around how long or how much it was going to take.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where the opportunity is. It's like, what things are we pushing off? What things we like, are we saying like, oh, that's just the way it always is, that we could be doing it in a different way? And it's like taking those blinders off and, I don't know, like Matrix, red pill, blue pill, like which one are we going to take? We're kind of in this place where we start to look at things differently. But I think you can really go down the rabbit hole and say, I want to test out this, app, this project, this to do this thing, that thing. But I think to your point, I think the biggest opportunity is what are there that are pain points you have on a day to day basis? What things have you been supposed to do for the last 10 weeks that you haven't wanted to do? And I think we sometimes say, like, I have to do it the way that I've always done it. So I don't want to do it. So I'm, pushing that off or procrastinating around it. But that's where an opportunity where there may be technology that we're not even thinking about that can be created or frankly, might be at our fingertips right now.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that people are starting to play around with it on a personal level. That's sort of stage one. And then, being able to get your organization or your team sort of utilizing it is the next piece. And then I think there becomes a place where if you can sort of implement and not, I don't know if replace is the right word, but we had one process in our business that we would sometimes pay thousands of dollars to a contractor to do every month, and it was very important, very critical. But now we took that $2,000 a month payment, and with a $20 a month chat gpt subscription, we could do all of it and more. It just required sort of laying some of the foundation and kind of creating some of the infrastructure to be able to do that. But I don't even know what the percentage of saved, right, to go from 2000 to
Yeah.
$20. It's like there's so many opportunities in people's business where they've been doing it for so long just because that's the way that it's been done, when, like you said, the paradigm has totally shifted, and what is possible at a reasonable and a price that and a investment that makes sense, whether that's time or whatever. I don't think like people's brains are even in the right ballpark of what's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, again, going back to that human part, there's a human aspect that's very, very real where I'm a big believer in that it's not either or, it's both and better. And I think that a lot of that is around like being abundant, looking at things abundantly. And I think that it's being able to kind of save that time and money so that it can be put towards other things. And, there's things that, I think we forget, like the technology, data, human, like what's trending on Google, what's trending on X, which, all these things are a direct kind of snapshot of what's happening from a humanistic standpoint. So I think we always are asking, like, is it the chicken and egg? Is it the technology or is it the humans? I think that the technology, when it's used correctly, actually serves humans. And I think it allows us to be even more human. Because we don't have to do those things that might be more menial or, might make more time, but it requires us to kind of let go of some of that fear, be and more and step into that abundance and just be open to like things changing, which is really, really hard and really, really difficult for everybody. For a human, standpoint, it's really hard to kind of do that. But I think once we start to have those conversations, start to see what's possible, I think, things can be unleashed from there.
Yeah, people always wonder about taking the human element out of it. And I'm like, well, to hundreds or thousands or pick out whatever time you want to go back, people were building like houses with their hand. They were building buildings with their hand. Today, we don't use, like, we could do that, but we use a crane or we use these tools
Right.
because it's not that humans aren't there, but it allows a different level of leverage, or it allows a different level of scale that wouldn't be possible. And so I think that if we're just trying to get back to baseline, or we're just trying to stay at baseline, then yeah, we're going to run into some issues. But if all of a sudden we pull off the ceiling and we see that there's a totally new, there's like new
Yeah.
possibilities that weren't even conceivable before. Well, now we might be able to start to fix some of this world that seems to be getting so crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't have your time and energy like kind of in those things that, aren't necessarily getting us closer to fixing and creating those solutions. So I think, yeah, incredible opportunity if we lean into that.
There's a lot of, whether it's administrative or research based, there's so many things that are taking people's time that if we can arm them with the right tools, they can, really, really do a lot more. What other sort of, whether it be books or concepts or ideas, what other things are you sort of excited about as we head into, we're recording this the first week of December in 2025. What sort of things are you looking forward to as we approach this new year?
I think one of the things like I ask on my pod is I always ask for CEO hacks, which are productivity, efficiency hacks or apps, books, habits that people lean on that make them more effective and efficient. So I've always loved spending time and geeking out, honestly, on technology things that I haven't, heard about before. But I will say and I literally just had a conversation around this earlier today. I'm going to go through my exercise towards the end of the year to figure out what I want to do. I started to do the 12-week year, which is basically that you basically take a order basically and make it into a year. You create plans, you can tweak and change and make adjustments really fast. But there's a book called 10X is Easier, and I believe it's Darian Hardy that wrote it. I believe I'm blanking on the name.
Dan
Basically,
Sullivan and Ben Hardy.
Dan Sullivan. That's where it is. Yeah, absolutely. I love that book because it kind of forces you to think differently about like how you're doing things. I think when you go back to and I forgot who wrote the other 10X book, but he's
Grant
really big
Cardone.
into sales.
Grant Cardone.
Cardone, yeah, Grant Cardone. He's pretty much like, hey, if you want to do 10x results, you need to put 10x efforts in. So it's very much so on like, what can you do to see better results? I think the other book, I like it because it forces you to think differently. Those old ways that we were doing things, you can get to 10x, but if you have those constraints, so you can't change those constraints. If you have only a certain amount of hours in the day and you have less than that to work on the business because you have two kids or you have this other job that you're trying to get to move to your side hustle, whatever it is that you're going through, you have to think differently on how you're going to do that. So that might be creating a better offer for the clients that you want to serve. Maybe you're not going to try to get 10 clients, you're going to try to get one client and make it a slam dunk offer that serves them so well. Or maybe it's an entirely different business. So I really like that and really kind of working through that just because it allows you to kind of think differently on like how you're doing things. And ultimately that's where that transformation is. So I'm literally like going through and filtering that my thoughts to say like where can I implement that better into my business going into this next year.
Yeah, we are a big fan of Ben Hardy on this show. His new book, I think it's The Science of Scaling, is what it's
Mhm.
called, is a brilliant one too. Because, and what I love about Ben, and it's exactly what you talked about, is that he is not about working harder only, or like that's not it, right? What's great about Grant is you read the book and it's like, okay, work harder, got
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Show me the brick wall. I'm running through
Yeah, and I
it.
think that that works to a point, and then you realize that there is a point where you need to work smarter. And the Ben Hardy's book is a great example of that. I've got two questions for you as we get out of here, Gresh. The first one is, if people want to get more connected with you, follow up with you, go deeper in your world, where's the best place for people to go?
Yeah, I have a site, iamgresh.com, iamgresh.com that has links to the podcast, CEO hacks, digital marketing, all the different things that I'm working on. So you can find quick links to it there.
Cool. We'll link that up in the show notes as always. And last question for you, Gresh. In your opinion, what is the secret to scaling a business?
The secret to scaling your business is going to ultimately depend. Is one of the reasons I love having the podcast because you get to redefine like what it means to be a CEO, entrepreneur, business owner. And scaling can be different things to different people. I mean, we always talk from a business standpoint of scaling is like getting more revenue, more clients, more customers. But what if we looked at it in a little bit of a different way? What if you wanted to spend more time with your wife, your son, your daughter, and you wanted to scale your time there? So I think the idea is really the secret to it is being first and foremost clear on what exactly scaling means to you, and then I think it means like really start to see like how you can maximize your time from there because time is one of the most valuable resources. The more that you can kind of maximize that, whether you're working in the business and doing more things or you're not working in the business and doing none of the things, I think that's the big thing. But I don't think there's one set answer. And I think that makes it difficult. But I think if we understand that and we can work backwards from the vision that we have for our life and our business, not either or, but both and better, then I think that's where really phenomenal things. So I think the secret is just being able to answer that for yourself and then trying to maximize the time for that to happen.